Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about the salary cap. It's August 1st. We are a month into free agency, and everything ground to a halt, didn't it? Now, with restricted free agents still out there and Jeremy Swayman having been signed to a $3.475 million awarded contract from the arbitrator, the Boston Bruins, now by my count, they were above the cap. So, because I looked at how much cap space they had going into this, and I was like, all right, well, so I did an entire video with Boston over the cap, and then I refreshed Cap Friendly, and they actually show Boston as about $400,000 in cap space. Not optimal, but we'll talk about it, and I will remake this video, and it'll be fantastic, and I apologize you never got to see the original. It was the best video I ever did. Oh well. So with the salary cap, there are 12 teams currently over the cap, but there are a lot of teams in cap trouble. There are a lot of teams that would like to add right now, and they can't. I would imagine there are a lot of GMs that are kind of frustrated. Now, I talked about this before the offseason even started, that, we knew this was going to happen again. The flat cap is definitely causing issues for general managers. Now, we can also discuss whether or not general managers are signing bad contracts another time. But for today, I want to talk about who's over the cap. And these are teams that I think still would like to add and make moves, but they can't. Starting with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't think Brad Treliving wants to be done. I do think he wants to do other things. But even with LTIR, they're over the cap. They're $2,068,950 over the cap. That is the most a team is over the cap after LTIR. So Toronto has to make a move. Somebody has to go. And I know there's a lot of speculation about who might. And certainly there's shrugging and, well, it'll be fine. It's no big deal. But you have to find somebody who's willing to bail you out. And there are a lot of teams in the NHL that might be like, hey, Brad, it's a shame that's going on. So if you're going to send us this contract and we're going to get you under the cap, how about next year's first round draft pick for that? So we've seen that. We've seen draft picks are usually the price for helping you get under the cap, because another GM is not under any obligation to help you get under the cap. For the Tampa Bay Lightning with LTIR, they're $73,333 over the cap. So that's manageable, right? But for Tampa Bay too, a team that would love to add, I think they'd love to add depth up front. I think they'd love to add on the blue line as well, and there just isn't the salary cap space to do it. Now, Colorado, thanks to LTIR, and again, this is LTIR candidates listed on Cap Friendly. Maybe we see somebody else end up on LTIR, right? But for people who want to complain and say, well, this team without LTIR, that's the only reason they're any good. Yeah, there's almost half the league right now that needs LTIR to get under the cap, so it's no longer a one-team thing. It's no longer that team's cheating thing. It's a league-wide issue right now. And again, next summer that should be alleviated a little bit. So with Montreal, a team that's a little bit surprising that they're over the cap. I remember with Weber's contract there as well. They were monstrously over the cap. But with the LTIR that Carey Price is going on to the injured reserve gives them $6,215,834 in cap space. But again, if they have that cap space, they're not giving that up for free. And Montreal is in a position where as they continue this rebuild, they've been doing it right. They're gonna weaponize that cap space, I would think. Vancouver, a team that I think needs another center, $1,482,083 with LTIR, and I think that includes both Pullman and Pearson. And there's been discussions about whether or not Pearson might actually come back. So for Vancouver, if they want another forward, and I'd like to see them add another guy down the middle, they just don't have the cap space to do it, unless it's dollar out, dollar in. And for all of the discussions I see about, well, they can trade Myers, sure they can. Where? And for what? So again, if a GM is getting a phone call and it's Patrick Alvin saying, hey, we want to move Tyler Myers, the answer that a GM would give him is, great, what's in it for us? Myers is still a good top six defenseman. Is he overpaid? Yes. But can he play a regular shift? Sure. You don't want to overplay him. But if a team's picking him up, yeah, the Vancouver Canucks are going to have to add a sweetener. That's why I think Garland is probably the most likely, although even in this market, does Garland have much value? Because I think if Garland had that value to move him, I think they already would have done it. Vegas, with long-term injured reserve, they're $851,683 under the cap. So Vegas, likely done for the offseason. And when you've won a Stanley Cup, pretty easy to be done. Pittsburgh's where you have an issue. So Drew O'Connor is still listed as a restricted free agent, and they don't have an LTIR candidate that's listed. Doesn't mean they won't have one by opening night, but they don't have one currently, so they're going to have to get creative if they're still over the cap, and whatever O'Connor gets is going to cause more headaches. Florida, with LTIR candidates, they're well under the cap, $9,824,999 according to Cap Friendly. The Florida Panthers, of course, finalists and looking to, continue building on what they did like 3 months ago, 2 months ago, a month ago. I don't know what are days anymore. But when they were in the Stanley Cup final, and they got all the way there, they were legitimate, they got there, and now they want to go back, right? The Washington Capitals, they're over the cap, no LTIR candidate listed. Islanders, same thing. Dallas, same thing. And Calgary, in the same situation. So Calgary is a team that wants to move players out, but again, they're over the salary cap. That does make it more difficult. Absolutely makes it more difficult for them to find a taker for somebody, especially with the cap situation around the NHL being as it is. One thing I wanted to point out, too, is so Toronto, Tampa, and Colorado being the top 3 teams, because again, I put them in order according to Cap Friendly. Being the top 3 teams above the cap, it's forgivable for Tampa Bay and Colorado because they're recent Stanley Cup winners. Toronto, it's arguable because there's always arguments about Toronto's cap space. And then you get to Montreal, which again, that overage is because of Carey Price's contract, which just comes off the books. But Vancouver really does stand out here. And this is an issue that's continued under Patrick Allvin, in that the team is spending like they're a contender, while the on-ice results would tell you something very different. So we'll see if that changes this year, but they're right now above the defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights. Pittsburgh, of course, won the Cup in 2016-2017. Florida was in the Stanley Cup final this past year, and they won the President's Trophy the year before. Washington won the Cap in 2018. The Islanders, Dallas, Calgary, all teams that are not too far above the salary cap, and they've been in various forms of contention over the last few years. But yeah, Vancouver to me really stands out being in that position. Then you get to the teams that are within $1 million of the cap. You've got the LA Kings. Now you have the Boston Bruins with the Swayman award of $3.475 million for a year. St. Louis and Carolina. These 4 here, I think that Carolina especially stands out because I'm wearing Sharks. Erik Karlsson's still a Shark, right? So I figured I did my first video. Swayman got signed. I'll do this video, because I was wearing a Bruins jersey, so that got Swayman signed. Sure, why not? So maybe it'll get Karlsson traded. But of course, the big locations where Karlsson's been rumored to be headed are he's talked to the Leafs. They're already over the cap. The Penguins, they're already over the cap. The Canes are within $1 million and clearly are on the out because D'Angelo is signed there. So now they really just don't have space on their roster or with the salary cap. Now, where things get interesting again is the Ottawa Senators. They're within $1 million. They have Pinto and Sokolov to sign. I'm not as worried with Ottawa necessarily. I think that Pinto probably takes a cheaper deal, maybe a 1 or a 2 year contract just to get them to next summer. But yeah, they're going to be over the cap. And then you've got Seattle within $1 million. But again, they did very well in year 2. No reason to think they won't do well in year 3 or that they need to go out and add a bunch. Now, teams that are within $2 million of the salary cap. You got Kalen Addison, still unsigned by the Minnesota Wild, so he's going to get paid. Let's just say it's a minimum of $1.5 million. Well, that's going to take him right up near the salary cap, right? And then you've got the New Jersey Devils, who are done. The Devils, I don't think, need to add anything. Their blue line looks excellent. Their forward group is fantastic. So, yeah, they're in pretty good shape. Within $3 million of the salary cap, things are interesting, too, with the New York Rangers. You've got Alexis Lafreniere. Lafreniere is going to get some money, but I think it's going to have to be a bridge deal for the fact that they're so close to the cap. They can't afford to give him an 8-year deal, even if on some level they feel like he's gonna blow up. And that's the trick with when you're a GM, is if you know that a player is going to really ascend quickly when it comes to their offensive numbers, you want them signed to a long-term deal, and that might be what's happened with Lafreniere. But at any rate, they have to get him signed. The Philadelphia Flyers, they have Frost yet to sign, but them being within $3 million of the cap, well, there's some LTIR there. I believe Couturier is still being listed as LTIR. Their injured reserve will give them $9,217,905 in cap space, again, according to Cap Friendly. So Philadelphia's in pretty good shape. But again, if you're on this side of the board and you want to make a deal with Philly, it's going to cost you. Within $5 million of the salary cap, the Winnipeg Jets, they're not done, obviously. At least I don't think they are. They do, I think, need to make a move or get some guys signed here, looking at Hellebuck and Scheifele. But they've got Stanley and Kupari outstanding. Now, Logan Stanley, I think, at this point, probably better off to start fresh somewhere else, but we'll see, right? Winnipeg, I think both Ville Heinola and Logan Stanley would probably benefit from a move, but again, we'll see what happens there. Columbus, Bernie is there. Well, Bernie's going to get probably around league minimum. That's not going to cost them a ton. Columbus is in decent shape, but again, it feels like they're kind of done. But I don't think teams should be so anxious to spend right to the cap before the season starts. I think if you're a GM and you go, hey, I have $4 million to spend, let's go spend it. Well, I think you're better off holding that into the regular season because there's going to be a desperate team calling you, usually by around the end of November, early December, I would think, and you have the cap space. You have the power. Now, more than $5 million in cap space, you start with San Jose. And this is where it's weird that they won't retain half the money on Karlsson. At least that's been Mike Greer's stance. He may need to alter that stance if they're going to actually make the move with Karlsson. Or you just wait until next summer when teams are going to have more cap space and see if that changes things. The risk you run is that Karlsson, in his mid-30s, you could see a regression in his numbers, you could see him get hurt, and it could drive down his value. So there's definitely risk there. The Oilers have more than $5 million in cap space, but it's a little bit deceptive because they haven't signed Evan Bouchard, they haven't signed Ryan McLeod, and so that makes things a little messy, right? The good news is nobody's giving any offer sheets because if anybody was going to, A, it would have happened already, and B, nobody has any money to give an offer sheet, so that's not a problem. But yeah, Bouchard's going to get paid. They need to get that done. And McLeod, decent depth forward, probably gets a decent contract, but not a ton of money. He won't put them over the cap. Then you got Buffalo. They're in good shape. But Buffalo has to keep in mind they have yet to sign Power to an extension. They're trying to sign Dahlin to an extension. And so you don't want to pick up anybody's bad contracts and potentially affect your ability to stay under the salary cap in future seasons. That's the other thing that GMs, I think, sometimes are short-sighted with is seeing the big picture for 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I understand they kind of have to approach it like this is their last year. Like if they blow it this year, they may not have a job next year. But I think there has to be a balance there, and sometimes it seems like it's not there. Yannick's a restricted free agent for the Coyotes, but they're nowhere near the cap. And again, they're going to be brokers. They're going to pick up draft picks. They're going to pick up prospects. They're also going to be better this year. So Arizona might be an interesting team to watch. They have cap space, and maybe they'll look to add somebody. Maybe they'll look to add a veteran. Maybe they'll look to add not necessarily a bad contract, but an expensive contract, and add a prospect while they're at it and make their team better. Detroit, Veleno's a restricted free agent, but Detroit's not in any cap trouble. I know there's people who don't like the contracts that Yzerman signed this summer, but they're fine. Like, it's not a big deal yet. Obviously, they're going to have to give big salary raises to guys like Raymond and to Sider and others, of course, in the organization. But for right now, they're okay, and the salary cap is projected to go up quite a bit next summer. Nashville's an interesting one. They have cap space. I think that for Barry Trotz, he's looking at some sort of a reset here. But if they get off to a good start, don't be surprised if they decide to add somebody. Chicago and Anaheim, both teams that are expected to be near the bottom of the standings and are at the bottom of the board. But Anaheim's deceptive. Troy Terry, not signed, going to arbitration, I believe, on the 4th. Jamie Drysdale and Trevor Zegras, not going to arbitration, but they're both restricted free agents as well. Those are 3 pillars for this rebuild, 3 pillars for this franchise, if they're really and truly going to turn it around. And so while the team has $27,185,833 in cap space, again, according to Cap Friendly, a lot of that's going to get eaten up by those 3 guys. And are you better off signing them to long-term deals or short-term deals? Again, it feels like the long-term deal ages well. I've done videos on 8-year contracts where I kind of expected to say, look how terrible these are. These long-term contracts are crazy. Generally, they age pretty well. The cap usually goes up, so the cap hit percentage drops every year. And yeah, usually they age pretty well. So if Pat Verbeek does this right, he could get them all signed to really good contracts and make Ducks fans pretty happy. But yeah, the Ducks being at the bottom of the board is a little bit deceptive. Once those 3 guys get signed, they're going to go up a bit. So there you go. That's where we're at right now with the salary cap in the National Hockey League. Again, the Boston Bruins, I thought were over the cap, but apparently they're not. So okie dokie. And so I just kind of crammed the logo in there because why not redo the video? So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Let me know who you think has managed the salary cap the best and who you think has managed it the worst. And which other teams do you think are going to end up over the salary cap when we reach the start of October and need LTIR to get under the salary cap? Again, I am sure that we'll hear cheating accusations as we've heard every year with Cup champs. But technically, Cup champs are usually made up of the team with the best players. It makes sense they might end up over the cap. But let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.